كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So we're going to be continuing in these videos looking at different scenarios where a person takes an oath and their application. So in the first scenario, a person takes an oath not to wear something or not to do something, and they are currently in the middle of that. So we'll be looking at what happens in that scenario. So scenario one is looking at where a person says they're not going to do something and they're already doing it. So they say, I'm not going to wear this item of clothing, they're already wearing the clothing. They say that I'm not going to ride this animal, they are already riding the animal. So we'll be having a look at what happens in that scenario, and does the oath become invalid straight away, or are they given some time to take off the clothing or stop doing what they are doing. Another scenario we'll be looking at is a person says, I will not reside in a particular location. So we'll be looking at the meaning of reside here, la yaskunu, and what exactly that implies. At which point are they considered to be residing there? At which point are they considered not to be residing there? Do they have to have their belongings and their family there for it to be considered residing or not? Another scenario we'll be looking at is the issue of Yamin al-Fawr. Yamin al-Fawr is a case where a particular issue is happening and a person uses general words, but they're referring to a particular issue. So somebody is leaving the house and they say that if you leave the house, then you are divorced, for example, right? So in that scenario, what if the person comes back in the house and then later on tries to leave the house? So is the oath applicable only to that scenario, to the first scenario when they were trying to leave the house, or is it applicable to any moment that they leave the house? We'll be looking at some cases where of ownership, that sometimes there are cases where an individual does own something, but we disconnect that ownership when it comes to an oath. We'll also be looking at a case about speaking. A person takes an oath not to speak. So what is considered speaking? What happens if they recite the Quran and they engage in some other type of dhikr? Will that be considered speaking? And will the oath break as a result of that or not? So inshallah, these are some of the scenarios that we'll be looking at in the coming videos. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Okay, we are continuing with different scenarios and different oaths that people can take, and analyzing those sentences, analyzing those oaths, and breaking them down to see how the oath will take effect and what type of action will break the oath. So the next scenario that we have here is حلف لا يلبس هذا الثوب وهو لابسه فنزعه للحال لم يحنث وإن لبث ساعة حنيثة. So a person is wearing an item of clothing and they take an oath that I swear by Allah I will not wear this item of clothing. So this is interesting because normally a person, if they swear an oath not to do something, they generally won't already be doing that thing. So there may be an item of clothing in somebody's cupboard and they say, I swear by Allah I'm not going to wear this item. Maybe it has some sentimental value, maybe it belongs to somebody else, so you take an oath, I'm not going to wear this, or I'm going to stay away from this. But in the scenario that we have here, the person is already wearing it. You say, I'm wearing this jacket right now, and I say, I swear by Allah I will not wear this jacket. Now if the person straight away after taking the oath took it off, then the oath will not break. But if they stayed even for a moment with the jacket on and they didn't start taking it off straight away, then the oath will break. Now hopefully this should be, if you have been focusing and listening carefully to the previous scenarios, there's a principle here that is the same as one that we mentioned before, and hopefully you should be able to kind of apply that principle here. Why is it that if you take the jacket off immediately, the oath will not break, but if you leave it on for a little while, the oath will break? shouldn't the oath just break straight away as soon as the person has said it? Imam Zufar says that as soon as you've made this statement, your oath is going to break. As soon as you say that, I swear by Allah, I will not wear this jacket, then you're already wearing the jacket, so you've already broken the oath. So as soon as you make that statement and you utter those words, the oath is going to break and it's going to become invalid. That's according to Imam Zufar. As for the other Imams, what do they say? They say that whenever you take an oath is taken for the purpose of fulfilling it. So there must be enough time given to that person to be able to fulfill the oath. This is something that we've covered before, that an oath is there to be fulfilled. So there must be enough time for the oath to be fulfilled. So a person says, I swear by Allah that I'm not going to wear this jacket. Now they'll be given enough time that it takes just to take off the jacket straight away, so that their oath can stay intact and can be fulfilled. So for that person, if they take it off straight away, they're using that discretionary period that they have to take it off, and the oath will stay intact. But if they stayed with the jacket on, then the oath will take effect, and it's as though now they are wearing the jacket, and the oath will break. So the same will apply if a person is mounted on an animal and says, I swear by Allah, I will not mount this animal. They will be given the moment that as soon as they have finished stating that oath, they need to dismount the animal straight away. If they stay on the animal for even a little while longer, then the oath is going to become invalid. And the same applies to Sukna Dar. I swear by Allah that I will not live in this house. I swear by Allah that I will not reside in this house. And they carried on just residing in the house. Then, they were already living in the house. So they will be given a moment to start straight away making preparations to leave the house and move out of the house. If not, then the oath is going to become invalid. So bear the principle in mind, that the principle is the oath is taken to be fulfilled. So you don't want to have an impossible scenario where there is no possibility of the individual being able to fulfill the oath at all. Otherwise, the oath really doesn't have any purpose. So again, as a recap, if somebody takes an oath not to do something which they are already doing and already in the middle of, they will be given an opportunity to stop that straight away. And if they do stop it straight away, the oath will not become invalid. Let's have a look at the next scenario now. حلف لا يسكن هذه الدار فلا بد من خروجه بأهله ومتاعه أجمعه. A person took an oath that they will not reside, لا يسكن, they will not reside in this particular house. They will not reside in this particular house. They're already living in the house. So they live in a house with their family, their belongings, their children, everyone is in the house. And they take an oath that I swear by Allah, I will not live in this house. Now, we have to look at the word that was used. The word that was used was لا يسكن. I will not live, I will not reside. Now what does that mean? What does it mean by living and residing? It means sukna is essentially a long-term residence. It's a long-term residence. It's not like a hotel where you stay for maybe 1 night or 2 nights. A sukna is where you have moved in, your belongings are there, and you're going to be staying there long term. So if you're going to be staying there long term, what will you generally have with you? You'll generally have your belongings, you'll generally have your family staying with you as well. So that is what you refer to as a sukna. If a person, for example, stays 1 night in the masjid, or does i'tikaf for 10 days in the masjid, you don't call that a sukna. Yes, they might have a few items of theirs, but all of their essential items will generally be at home, their family will be at home. You don't refer to that as a sukna. If you're staying 1 night in a hotel, you don't refer to that as a sukna. So the person says, I will not reside, I will not make this my sukna, I will not reside, I will not live in this house anymore. Then in order for that oath to take effect, what needs to happen, or if the person doesn't want to break the oath, then what they will need to do is they will need to leave the house with their family members and with their belongings. They will have to leave with everything. Once they have left with everything, then you can say, okay, now he is not residing within the house, because all of that is part of residing. All of that is part of residing. But let's say, for example, now the person, they said, I'm not going to reside in this house. And they themselves left the house. They themselves left the house and they exited the house. That won't be sufficient. Why? Because all their belongings are there, their family are there, everything else is there. So essentially you are living there. Okay, you might not spend the night there, but essentially you're living there because all your items and all your belongings and your family members are there. That's why the fuqaha here, they mention فَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ خُرُوجِهِ بِأَهْلِهِ وَمَتَاعِهِ, that if you want to fulfill this oath, then you need to leave the house with your family members and with your belongings, because all of that collectively is considered to be sukna. So let's take another example. If you say, I swear by Allah, I will reside in a particular house. When will residing take place? When you actually fully move there with your family and with your belongings, because that is sukna. If you say, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to stay a night in this location, then it doesn't matter. Then okay, you spent a night. But when you use the word sukna, when you use the word reside, when you use the word I'm going to live, then in that case, you have to look at what is customarily understood to be living and residing in a particular location, in a particular place. Now, just say a person took this oath that I swear by Allah, I will not live in this house anymore. We said that they now need to move out with their belongings and with their family. If they don't move out straight away, immediately, because you can't just all of a sudden start unpacking a house and get out of the house and leave all your belongings outside on the road because you have nowhere else to go to, right? So if a person started looking for another property and they started moving belongings, even if it took a period of time, then the oath will still be invalid. So they took an oath that I'm not going to live in this property, and straight away they started ringing estate agents, they started looking at other properties, they started taking their belongings out and storing them somewhere else, but they still had some attachment with that place, then that is still fine. It's as though they're not living there anymore because they've initiated that process of moving out. So the oath will be valid and will not break, and a penalty will not have to be given. Inshallah, there's a few similar scenarios that we're going to have a look at in the following video, inshallah ta'ala. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. We'll have a look at another scenario now. A person said, اجلس فتغدى عندي, sit down and have dinner with us. Sit down and have dinner with us. So the individual responds and he says, إن تغديت فَعَبْدِي حُرٌّ, if I have dinner with you, then my slave is free. If I have dinner with you, then my slave is free. Now this is the statement that we're going to be looking at, where he says, if I have dinner with you, my slave is free. Now this doesn't seem like an oath, but if you remember right at the beginning, we said that if you have a sentence where you have a condition, and if the condition is fulfilled, then there's a consequence, like a slave becomes free or wife becomes divorced and so on, then that takes effect of an oath. Why? Because just like an oath is there to prohibit you from doing something, similarly here the condition is there to prohibit and prevent the consequence from taking place, in this case the slave becoming free. So the person doesn't want the slave to become free, so they're saying that, look, if I have dinner with you, my slave will be free. That means I shouldn't have dinner with you, and I can't have dinner with you. That's like saying, Wallahi, I will not have dinner with you. Right? So the statement the person said, so now here we need to look at what was offered and what was uttered. Right? So the host was making an offer, and then the individual takes an oath themselves. Right? This discussion that we're going to go on now, this is called the issue of Yaminul Fawr. Yaminul Fawr. Yaminul Fawr is about the oath taking effect in relation to the current time and the current circumstance. So the oath taking effect in relation to the current time and the current circumstance. So have a look. What did the host say? The host said, sit down. So that he's already in the house. They may be preparing the dinner, and he says, sit down with us and have dinner with us. Sit down and have dinner with us. And the individual says, if I have dinner, then my servant is free. Now, what is the intention of the host? Is the intention of the host have dinner with us on any day? Or is the intention have dinner with me right now? And when the person says, if I have dinner, then my slave is free, is he intending right now? Or is he referring to if I ever have dinner with you? So this is the issue of Yamin al-Fawr. Now clearly, the individual, the host, is offering the person, the guest, to sit down and have dinner right now. And the individual is saying, if I have dinner, i.e. if I have dinner with you right now, then my slave is free. Right? So if the person sat down there and then and he had dinner with them, then the oath is going to break. However, if he sends his apologies and he leaves the house and he goes away, and then at another time he comes back and he happens to have dinner, even if it's in that same house, the oath will not break. His oath will not break, because by saying, if I have dinner, my slave is free, he's not saying, if I ever have dinner in the future. He's not saying, if I ever have dinner with you, if I ever have dinner in your house. He meant the dinner that he was specifically invited to. So therefore, the oath will only be applicable in relation to that particular dinner as well. So therefore, if he leaves the house, فَرَجَعَ وَتَغَدَّى فِي بَيْتِهِ لَمْ يَحْنَثْ. If he went and he had dinner, whether it was elsewhere or he came back here at another time, the oath is not going to break. Now, let's have a look at a few scenarios that are similar to this when it comes to the issue of Yamin al-Fawr. Yamin al-Fawr in relation to the Yamin and the oath being applicable in the current circumstance and the current issue. A lady wanted to leave the house, the wife wanted to leave the house, and the husband didn't want her to go out. So she has some plans to go and meet some people, and the husband doesn't want her to go and meet those individuals. So he says to her, in kharajti fa anti taliq. If you leave the house, then you are divorced. So this is another scenario where you have a condition and a consequence. If you leave, you are divorced. So maybe she's standing by the door, she's ready to go out of the house, and the husband says to her, if you go out of that door right now, then you are divorced. If you go out of that door right now, then you are divorced. So she comes back into the house, she sits, they spend the evening, they discuss, they have some conversation, and then at a later moment she then goes and she leaves the house. In that case, again, the divorce will not take place. Why? Because when he's saying in kharajti, if you leave the house, the moment that they are in, where she's by the door and she wants to leave and she wants to exit, and his response when he's saying this is in reference to that situation and that scenario, the oath then is only applicable to that particular context. Therefore, if they move away from that scenario and the scenario changes, and then later on she then leaves the house, that leaving at that moment is not linked to the oath that was taken initially. So that's why the fuqaha say, in kharajti fa anti taliq, fajalasat thumma kharajat lam tutlaq. That she sat down and then she exited later on, then the divorce will not take effect, because the intention or the effect of the oath is on that particular circumstance only. Now let's have a look at another similar scenario where you have a discussion of a slave. A person says he wanted to hit his slave. A person wanted to hit his slave, he wanted to strike his slave. So another person says to him, if you strike your slave, then my slave is free. If you strike your slave, or if you strike your slave, sorry. لو أراد ضرب عبده فقال له آخر إن ضربته فعبده حر. Okay. So he wanted to strike a slave, and the person said to him that if you strike a slave, if you strike it, then my slave is going to be free. So just say again, you have this idea, or let's say somebody has a student and they're ready with the student and they're about to do something really bad to the student. They're going to hit them, they're going to beat them, for example, and they're ready there and then. And you say, if you hit this student, then my slave is free. If you hit this servant, then my slave is free. So again, of course, the intention here is fawr. The intention is what is happening in that context. The person was about to strike that slave, was about to strike that young boy, strike that student, and your intention when talking about or making this oath was that particular circumstance. So فَتَرَكَهُ, so then the person said, okay, I'm not going to strike this child or this slave. And then later on he then goes and strikes him. The oath will not break, because again it was intended for that particular circumstance, not a later circumstance. It's for that particular issue, not a later issue. So this is the issue, or this is called the issue of Yaminul Fawr. Yaminul Fawr. Now let's look at some other scenarios not related to Yaminul Fawr, just another scenario. حلف لا يركب دابة فلان فركب دابة عبده المأذون لم يحنث مديونا كان أو غير مديون. This discussion is related now to ownership, and how do you determine what an individual owns and what they do not own. So a person says that they will not take an oath, they take an oath that they will not mount the ride of a particular person. They will not mount the ride of Imran, for example. Right? So Imran is a slave owner, and he has a slave. And his slave is given permission to engage in business and trade. So that slave, as they're doing business and as they're trading, they end up acquiring some assets, and one of the assets that they acquire is an animal, is a horse, for example. So now Imran is the slave owner, and the slave has a horse which has bought from buying and selling and doing some business. Now a person comes and says, I will not ride an animal that belongs to Imran. I will not ride Imran's animal. And then he goes and he rides on the animal that belongs to the slave. He goes and rides the animal that belongs to the slave. Now technically, a slave belongs to the slave owner, and anything that belongs to the slave also belongs to the slave owner. So it should belong to Imran. The slave belongs to Imran, and therefore anything that the slave owns from doing business, like this animal, also belongs to Imran. So technically, by riding the animal of the slave, you have ridden the animal of the slave owner, Imran, and therefore the oath should become invalid. However, the fuqaha say that the oath will not become invalid, and inshallah in the next video we will explain exactly why the oath does not become invalid in this particular scenario and in this particular context. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Okay, so the scenario that we had a look at is an individual said, I will not ride Imran's animal, and then Imran's servant then happens to have an animal because it was doing some buying and selling, acquired some wealth and purchased an animal. So the individual, he said, I'm not going to ride Imran's animal, and then he goes and rides the animal that belongs to the servant and the slave. So technically a slave belongs to the slave owner, and anything the slave owns also belongs to the slave owner. So by riding the animal of the slave, ultimately the person has ridden Imran's animal also, and therefore the oath should become invalid and the oath should break and a penalty should have to be given. However, the fuqaha say that if that slave is a slave who is permitted to work and has acquired that animal, then the oath will not break, regardless of whether that slave is fully immersed in debt or whether they are not immersed in debt. And let's have a look at these two scenarios. So if the slave is fully in debt, so the slave is doing some business, and during the business they have a lot of debt, right? While buying this animal, they acquired a lot of debt. Now technically, you have the slave owner, you have the slave, and you have the animal. The animal has been purchased by the slave, but the slave is now in debt. So if the slave is in debt, and just imagine that the slave cannot pay off their debt, what's going to happen? If the slave cannot pay off their debt because they're fully immersed in debt, the creditors can then come and take that animal and sell the animal in order to make the money that they are owed. Right? So they could essentially come and take the animal, sell the animal, and take back the money that they are owed. So because this is a possibility, because the slave is in debt, and those that are owed the money could potentially do this, the animal is not going to be considered a asset of Imran, right? We're going to say that he has no entitlement in that animal, right? He has no entitlement in that animal, because potentially the animal could be taken away. Now, what about the case where the slave, that's because the slave has debt. What if the slave doesn't have debt, or it has a bit of debt? Then in that case, the slave owns the animal, and Imran owns the slave, so therefore Imran also owns the animal. However, because the slave purchased the animal, customarily, we're going to look at the custom, not technical issues. We're looking at what is customary here. Customarily, the right is still attributed to the slave. We still say, it's the slave's horse. It's the slave's horse, right? So because of that, because of both these scenarios, there's a disconnection with Imran itself. So technically, it should all belong to Imran. But if the slave is in debt, then the creditors could come and take that animal and make their money's worth. So therefore, there's a disconnect to Imran. He doesn't have a full entitlement over the animal. Number two, when the slave buys the animal, when a slave purchases his animal, customarily we consider it to be the animal of the slave. So again, there's a disconnect to Imran. So now when this person takes an oath and says, I will not ride the animal, I will not ride any of Imran's animals, I will not ride any of Imran's animals, then in that case we will say that this animal is not considered to be Imran's animal. Therefore the oath will not become invalid and the oath will not break. The only exception, and hopefully now you can kind of guess what I'm going to indicate towards. The scope of the wording incorporates this much. Based on the custom, we said the animal is not linked to Imran. How could we link the animal to Imran? How could we link this animal to the oath? There's only one way, and that is intention. So if the person, when they were taking this oath, specifically intended this animal, when they said, I will not ride Imran's animal, and Imran has no animals apart from this one animal that the slave owns, and that is the intention of the person, only then, because we said intention can override the custom, only then could the oath become invalid by riding the animal of the slave and of the servant. So hopefully that clarifies this scenario and this question. This is kind of touching on the issue of ownership, that sometimes there may be a technical ownership in place and there may be a technical entitlement in place. However, because of other circumstances or because of customary practice, we won't consider that item to be belonging to that individual. And maybe you can think about some circumstances today that may occur where an individual owns an item, but we don't consider it to be that individual's item for whatever reason. Now, another scenario. حلف لا يتكلم فقرأ القرآن أو سبح أو هلل لم يحنث. This is an interesting scenario because again we're looking really closely at the words that are there. A person said or took an oath that they will not speak. That they will not speak. I will not speak. So speak is to do with speech, right? And it's not about just uttering words that have no meaning or uttering certain other types of words. Speech is between two people where you're speaking to somebody, right? So حلف لا يتكلم, swore, take an oath that I will not speak. And then they ended up reciting the Quran, or they ended up doing some tasbih, subhanallah, 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 or tahleel, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. The oath will not break by reciting the Quran, by doing tasbih, or by reciting the kalima. Why? Because again, oaths are based on the custom, and it is not customary to consider this person to be speaking. If you have a person in the room, if there are 3 people in the room, you walk into a room and there are 3 people in the room. 2 of them are talking to each other and one of them is reciting Quran. And if I go to you and I say, take this book and give it to the person that is speaking, you will take it to those 2 individuals that are talking, you'll go give it to them. You wouldn't even think about going to the person that's reciting Quran and handing the book over to them. Because customarily, we don't consider that to be speech, we don't consider that to be speaking. So, حَلَفَ لَا يَتَكَلَّمُ, we took an oath that you're not going to speak, and they recited the Quran, then the oath will not break until the person actually speaks and engages in conversation with somebody. حلف لا يكلمه شهرا. Now here we have a bit of a time stipulation. One oath is to say, I swear by Allah, I will not speak to this person. I swear by Allah, I will not speak to this person. What happens in that scenario? In that scenario, you cannot speak to that person now forever. And when you do break, whether you should break this oath or not is a separate discussion that we discussed right at the beginning, when we looked at the scenarios when you should break an oath, when you shouldn't break an oath, when you must break an oath, when you can't break an oath, and so on, right? So this person said, I will not speak to X forever, right? So it's applicable now, and any moment that the individual speaks to the other person, what's going to happen? The oath is going to break and a penalty will have to be given. However, if he says that I swear by Allah, I will not speak to the person for 1 month. I will not speak to the person for 1 month. Now what they have done here is they have made it dependent upon time. So there's now a 1 month duration. If you didn't mention month, then it would have been lifelong. But by mentioning month, it now becomes restricted to 1 month. And anything beyond the month is now excluded from the oath. So it would have been this long, but by saying month, you've basically capped it here, and now only this much is applicable and the rest of it is not applicable. So the month will start from as soon as they uttered the oath. I swear by Allah, I will not speak to this individual for 1 month. At that moment where they said month and they stopped speaking and the sentence has come to an end, then the month will initiate, and from that point, a full month they cannot speak to the other person. And if they do speak to the other person, then the oath is going to become invalid, the oath is going to break, and they are going to have to give a kafara and a penalty for having broken that oath. So we've covered a few scenarios here. Inshallah, in the next set of videos, we will be looking at further scenarios in regards to taking an oath and the slight differences that we see between these words that are being used when taking an oath. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we've had a look at a few more scenarios in regards to taking an oath, and hopefully now things are starting to become a bit more clear, that how we have to look very carefully at the wording that is used and see what can fit within that wording. Then we look at what is the customary practice of the time, and then we also look at what is the intention of the individual. So we're going to look at all of these things together in order to determine exactly what kind of actions break the oath and what type of actions do not break the oath. So scenario 1 that we looked at is when an individual takes an oath not to do something which they are already doing, they're in the middle of, and we said that an oath is there to be fulfilled, so therefore the person is given enough time to stop that action before, and their oath will not break. But if they carried on with it, then the oath will become invalid. We also had a discussion of residing in a particular location, and we said residing means to reside there with your family and your belongings long term. So if you say you're not going to reside in a particular location and you just happen to spend a day there or spend a night there, you don't have your family there, then we won't consider that to be residing. We also had a look at the issue of Yamin al-Fawd. Yamin al-Fawd is when a particular issue is happening, and in reference to that particular issue, an oath is made. If you hit the slave, then my slave is my free. If you open the door right now and go out, then but they don't say that. They just say if you leave, then you are divorced. Now the intention is if you leave right now. The purpose is in relation to this interaction that is happening right now. So if the person wasn't to leave and then later on they left, then it doesn't matter, even though leaving is found, but the intention is at that particular moment. We had to look at a case where a slave owner technically owns a slave and any items the slave owns. However, there are certain circumstances when we can disconnect that ownership, and we disconnect the ownership between the slave owner and the items of the slave, unless the individual has an intention. We also looked at takallum, means speaking to somebody, and reciting Quran does not result in takallum, and therefore somebody said I will not speak, and they happen to recite the Quran, then the oath will not become invalid and the oath will not break.